A group of merciless thugs mistakenly thought they were merely stealing from another destitute individual, taking what few possessions he had left. Little did they realize, the man they targeted, and whose dog they had mistreated, was none other than Keanu Reeves. He had been patiently awaiting his train, looking to head home after a grueling day on set, when these thugs approached him, thinking they had found an easy mark. Stay tuned until the end to discover the unexpected twist this confrontation took. You won't want to miss this. As the day dwindled and the hustle of the streets began to subside, Keanu Reeves's evening was just starting. Stepping out of the movie studio, he inhaled the crisp evening breeze of New York City. His attire was strategically casual: tattered jeans, a loosely fitting denim jacket, and an old baseball cap drawn down over his eyes. His choice of clothing was deliberate, aiming to merge with the crowd instead of standing out as a star. After spending hours filming, the last thing he desired was to attract public attention. Alongside him was Andy, a beagle pup with droopy ears and expressive eyes, who was given to Keanu for bonding before filming scenes for John Wick. Keanu was permitted to take Andy home temporarily, a short-term setup that quickly became more significant than anticipated. As they strolled, Keanu couldn't help but be charmed by Andy's enthusiastic tail wagging at each new scent and sight. Despite their brief acquaintance, a clear bond had formed between them. Andy gazed up at Keanu with eyes full of trust, deepening Keanu's sense of duty to this little creature beyond his professional responsibilities. Their path led them toward the 14th Street Union Square subway station, the late-night crowd thinning as they descended into the subterranean complex. The harsh fluorescent lighting starkly illuminated the concrete surroundings, highlighting the contrast between the vibrant city above and the more subdued world below. The sound of echoing footsteps and distant train rumblings added to the ambience as they moved deeper into the station. Passing a storage alcove known as a refuge for the homeless, rows of makeshift tents and shelters lined the walls, starkly illustrating the city's social disparities. Unlike the other late-night commuters who quickly passed by, avoiding engagement, Keanu continued his nightly routine, patiently offering coins and small bills to each person he encountered. "This is for you," he whispered gently to an old woman nestled under a frayed blanket. She looked up, her face creasing into a smile of gratitude. "God bless you, young man," she responded, her voice tinged with emotion. Keanu simply nodded and moved on, performing these acts not for accolades, but as a personal commitment to recognize and respect those often forgotten by society. As they progressed, Andy's youthful energy occasionally drew smiles from the individuals they passed, momentarily lifting the gloomy atmosphere. Reflecting on the stark differences between his life and those dwelling in this underground realm, Keanu felt the weight of the disparity. He knew his small gestures of kindness wouldn't solve the broader systemic issues, but he hoped they might at least brighten someone's day momentarily. As they neared a familiar tent, something seemed amiss. Usually, this spot was home to Max and his chihuahua, Button. Tonight, however, a troubling silence hung in the air. "Max, are you there?" Keanu called out, a note of worry in his voice. After a tense pause, the tent flap stirred and Max appeared, his appearance marked by recent suffering, a severe bruise near his temple and a look of profound sadness in his eyes, a stark contrast to his usual cheerful demeanor. "Oh, hey, Keanu," Max murmured, his voice a faint whisper, as he attempted a strained smile. But the sadness didn't reach his eyes. Keanu squatted down to Max's level, who had found a spot on a small crate outside his tent. "Max, what happened? Are you okay?" Keanu asked, his gaze darting around, noting the unusual quiet where the constant yapping of Max's dog usually filled the air. "Where's Button?" At the mention of Button's name, Max's composure shattered. His shoulders slumped, and he buried his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were overflowing with tears. "They took her, Keanu," Max managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. Those bastards took my button. Keanu's brow creased with confusion and worry. Who took her? What happened? Max took a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he pulled an empty dog collar from his pocket. The sight seemed to intensify his pain. It was yesterday, Max started, his voice hollow. These thugs. They've been harassing us for a while, demanding security fees, claiming they own this territory. He spat the words out with scorn. I couldn't pay. I never can. Usually, they rough me up a bit and leave. Keanu listened closely, placing a comforting hand on Max's shoulder. Andy sat quietly by his side, seemingly aware of the gravity of the situation. But yesterday, Max continued, his voice cracking, Button tried to protect me. She's always been brave, my little girl. When they started shoving me, she barked at them and— He paused, swallowing hard. She bit one of them on the ankle. Keanu closed his eyes, dreading the continuation of the story. They went crazy, Max said, the words tumbling out rapidly. One of them kicked her hard. She yelped, and I tried to grab her, but then— His hand touched the bruise on his temple. One of them had a baseball bat. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was back in my tent. The others here found me and brought me back. But Button— His voice trailed off, and he stared down at the empty collar in his hands. I'm so sorry, Max, Keanu said softly, his voice filled with genuine anguish. Do you think— Is there a chance she might still be alive? Max shook his head slowly. I don't think so, Keanu. News travels fast down here. If anyone had seen or heard anything about a little chihuahua, I'd know. It's been silent. And those guys— They're not the type to show mercy. Keanu's mind raced, processing this heartbreaking information. Have you gone to the police? He asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. Max let out a bitter laugh. The police? They're just another gang, demanding money to investigate. They don't care about us, Keanu. To them, we're just a nuisance, a problem to be swept under the rug. The weight of Max's words hung heavily in the air. Keanu felt a surge of anger at the injustice, mixed with a deep sadness for Max's loss. He looked down at Andy, who sat quietly by his side, and felt a renewed appreciation for the pup's presence. I'm truly sorry, Max, Keanu said, his voice filled with empathy. Is there anything I can do to help? Max shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. You being here, listening, that's more than most people do. You're a good man, Keanu. As they sat in the dim light of the subway station, Keanu realized that the world of these forgotten individuals was far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. The story of Button's fate served as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of those living on the margins of society and the cruelty that could exist in the shadows of the city he called home. As the heavy silence settled between them, Max's gaze drifted to Andy, who had been sitting patiently throughout their conversation. A flicker of interest sparked in his eyes, momentarily pushing aside the cloud of grief. Is this your puppy? Max asked, his voice softening as he looked at the beagle. Keanu glanced down at Andy, a small smile tugging at his lips. Not exactly, he explained. Andy here is a temporary companion for a film role. He actually belongs to a dog trainer who works with animal actors. Max nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of joy and melancholy as he reached out to gently pat Andy's head. The beagle responded with a friendly wag of his tail, leaning into Max's touch. He's got a sweet nature, Max observed, his voice tinged with wistfulness. You can tell a lot about a dog in just a few moments. This one's got a good heart. Keanu watched as Max interacted with Andy, seeing a glimpse of the man he had known before this tragedy. It was a poignant reminder of the healing power of animal companionship, something Max had lost so cruelly. As Keanu prepared to continue his journey to Platform 1, Max's demeanor shifted. The brief moment of lightness faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Keanu," Max said, his voice low and urgent, "be careful, especially at this hour. The station. It's not safe. Those guys, they're always looking for easy targets." The warning carried extra weight coming from Max, given his recent experience. Keanu nodded, taking the advice seriously. "I appreciate the heads-up, Max. I'll keep my eyes open." As they said their goodbyes, Max's words struck a chord with Keanu. "You know, you're the only person who's spoken to me today," Max admitted, talking about Button. "It helped, even if just a little. Thank you for that." Keanu felt a pang in his chest at the stark reminder of the isolation that came with homelessness. "I'll be back tomorrow, Max. Take care of yourself, okay?" Max nodded, his eyes once again darting around nervously. "You too, Keanu. Remember what I said. Be watchful." With a final nod, Keanu and Andy made their way towards Platform 1. The station seemed eerily quiet now, their footsteps echoing against the tiled walls. At a nearby booth, Keanu purchased a coffee, more out of habit than desire, before settling on one of the benches to wait for his train. As he sipped the bitter liquid, Keanu found himself talking softly to Andy, the pup's presence a comforting constant in the unsettling atmosphere. "What do you think, buddy? Quite a night, huh?" The relative quiet was suddenly shattered by the sound of heavy boots scraping against the concrete floor. Keanu looked up to see three men approaching, their swagger and demeanor immediately setting off alarm bells in his mind. Max's warning echoed in his thoughts as he watched them draw nearer. The men, clearly intoxicated, zeroed in on Keanu with predatory focus. Two of them carried baseball bats, swinging them casually but with clear menace. As they got closer, Keanu could smell the alcohol on their breath. "Well, well," the tallest of the three sneered. "Looks like we got a new hobo guy around here." Keanu remained calm, his voice steady as he replied, "I'm just waiting for my train." The bold thug laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the empty platform. "Oh, we've heard that one before. Who do you think you are? A celebrity?" The third man, shorter but stocky, chimed in, "No celebrity dresses like that. Stop being a clown and pay up." Keanu's mind raced, realizing these must be the same thugs Max had warned him about. He tried again to defuse the situation. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not homeless. I'm just—" His words were cut off as the tall thug stepped forward, invading his personal space. "We don't care what you are. Look at us. I'm Bowie, the tall one's Will, and here is Connie. You are in our territory, and you pay for the privilege of being here." As the confrontation escalated, Keanu felt a mix of emotions: anger at the injustice, concern for Andy's safety, and a growing realization of the danger he found himself in. The platform, once a mundane part of his daily routine, had transformed into an arena of threat and uncertainty. With the thugs closing in and Andy growing restless beside him, Keanu knew he had to make a decision: fight, flee, or try to reason with these men who seemed beyond reason. The weight of Max's story and the reality of the underground community's struggles pressed heavily on him as he faced this unexpected confrontation. The tension on the platform continued to escalate as Keanu found himself cornered by the three aggressive thugs. Despite his attempts to explain the misunderstanding, the men remained unconvinced and increasingly hostile. "I'm telling you again, I'm not homeless," Keanu insisted, his voice calm but firm. "I'm just waiting for my train." The tallest thug, Will, sneered. Yeah. Empty your pockets, tough guy." Realizing the potential danger of the situation, Keanu slowly reached into his pockets, maintaining eye contact with the thugs. He produced a worn leather wallet and held it out, hoping this small concession might diffuse the situation. Will snatched the wallet, rifling through it with growing disappointment. $20. That's it. He tossed the wallet back at Keanu in disgust. As Keanu caught the wallet, the bald thug's eyes locked onto something else. Well, well, what do we have here? His hand shot out, grabbing at Keanu's neck. For a moment, Keanu thought the man was going to strangle him, but instead he felt a sharp tug as his necklace was violently ripped away. The chain snapped. Keanu watched in dismay as his treasured family heirloom swung from the thug's grimy fingers. "Hey, that belongs to my family," Keanu protested, his composure faltering for the first time. "It has no value to you, but it means everything to me." Will laughed cruelly, the sound echoing through the desolate station. "Oh, I think it has plenty of value to us. What's the matter? Your family probably all dead, otherwise you wouldn't be here all alone, looking like that with a puppy." The words cut deep, not for their truth, but for the heartlessness behind them. A surge of anger welled up inside Keanu. Without thinking, he stood and grasped for the necklace in Will's hand. "Give it back," he demanded, his voice low and menacing. For a moment they tugged at the necklace, then suddenly, Connie shoved Keanu hard, sending him stumbling backward. As he regained his balance, he found himself face to face with a baseball bat, Connie holding it threateningly. "Make another move, and you'll regret it," he growled. The situation was spiraling out of control. Keanu's mind raced, searching for a way to defuse the predicament without putting himself or Andy in danger. But the thugs weren't finished with their cruelty. Bowie, the bald thug, turned his attention to Andy with a malicious grin, spat deliberately on the puppy, and knocked over Keanu's coffee, the warm liquid spilling over both man and dog. Andy yelped in surprise and discomfort, and something in Keanu snapped. He lunged forward, trying to shield the puppy from further harm, but Andy, frightened and agitated, broke free from his grip. The beagle, barking furiously, chased after the retreating thugs. Keanu's heart raced as he saw Andy's leash dragging behind him just out of reach. "Andy, no!" he called out, desperation in his voice as he chased after the puppy. Time seemed to slow as Keanu's fingers finally closed around the end of the leash, but his relief was short-lived. As he looked up, he realized he was now surrounded by the thugs, with Andy having bitten onto Bowie's boot. "Looks like your mutt needs to be taught a lesson," Will sneered, reaching for the leash. Keanu tried to maintain his grip, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. With a violent tug, the leash was wrenched from his hands. Andy yelped as he was lifted off the ground, his little legs kicking in the air. "Stop, please," Keanu pleaded, his composure completely shattered. "He's not even my dog. He belongs to where I work. You can't." His words were cut off as Connie raised his baseball bat threateningly. "I've cracked plenty of homeless skulls with this. Don't think I won't do the same to you." Keanu felt utterly helpless as he watched the thug strap Andy's mouth shut with a belt, a chilling echo of Button's fate that Max had described earlier. The puppy's whimpers of fear and confusion tore at Keanu's heart as the thugs began to retreat with Andy in tow. Keanu made one last desperate attempt to intervene, but the bat hovering inches from his face served as a stark reminder of the danger he was in. "Consider this payment for your territory stay," Will sneered as they backed away, Andy struggling in their grip. Keanu stood frozen, watching as they disappeared into the shadows of the station, taking with them not just a dog, but a piece of his faith in humanity. The echoes of Andy's muffled whimpers haunted him, a painful reminder of his failure to protect the innocent creature entrusted to his care. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had just happened crashed down on Keanu. He had lost not only his family heirloom, but also Andy, a dog he had grown to care for deeply in their short time together. The cruelty and injustice of it all left him feeling hollow and angry. In that moment, standing alone on the platform, Keanu made a silent vow. He would not let this stand. Somehow, someway, he would find Andy and bring him home safely. With renewed determination, he set off in pursuit of the thugs, ignoring the approaching train and the stares of the few passengers who had witnessed the tail end of the confrontation, not recognizing who he was. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest as he raced through the station, his eyes scanning frantically for any sign of the thugs or Andy. The sound of an approaching train barely registered in his mind. His sole focus was on finding the puppy and retrieving his stolen necklace. As he ran, Max's warning about Button's fate echoed in his thoughts, driving him forward despite the odds stacked against him. He couldn't bear the thought of Andy suffering a similar destiny. The station seemed to stretch endlessly before him, a labyrinth of tunnels and platforms that could easily hide 3 men and a small dog. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of movement ahead. The thugs had split up, each taking a different route, a clearly practiced escape strategy designed to confuse and misdirect any pursuit. Keanu hesitated for a split second, unsure which path to take, before choosing to follow the one he thought was carrying Andy. He pushed through the crowd of passengers exiting a newly arrived train, muttering hurried apologies as he jostled past them, but the delay cost him precious seconds. By the time he reached the spot where he'd last seen the thug, there was no sign of him or Andy. Breathless and disoriented, Keanu spun around, searching desperately for any clue, but the thugs had vanished, swallowed up by the maze-like structure of the subway system. The realization that he had lost them hit him like a physical blow, leaving him feeling helpless and frustrated. As he stood there, trying to catch his breath and figure out his next move, Keanu noticed 2 police officers nearby. Hope flared in his chest. Surely they could help. He approached them, his voice urgent. "Excuse me, officers. I need to report a robbery and a kidnapping." The officers turned to look at him, and Keanu saw their expressions change. They took in his disheveled appearance, the coffee stains on his clothes, and immediately their demeanor shifted from professional interest to thinly veiled disgust. "Look, buddy," one of the officers said, his tone dismissive, "we don't have time for this. Why don't you move along?" Keanu blinked, taken aback by their response. "You don't understand," he insisted. "These men, they stole my necklace and took a dog. We need to find them before—" "Listen," the other officer cut in, his voice hard, "we don't help people like you. Go sleep it off somewhere else." The blatant prejudice in their tone left Keanu speechless for a moment. He was about to argue further when a voice behind him called out, "Oh my God, is that Keanu Reeves?" Keanu turned to see a young woman approaching, her phone already out and ready for a photo. The change in the officer's demeanor was instantaneous, their expressions shifting from disdain to shock, then to an almost comical attempt at friendliness. "Mr. Reeves," the first officer said, his voice now dripping with false concern, "we had no idea. How can we assist you?" The fan, realizing that something serious was happening, began to record the situation on her phone. Seeing this, the officers quickly ushered her away, their earlier prejudice now replaced by obvious embarrassment. Keanu felt a mix of emotions, anger at the officer's initial response, frustration at the time wasted, and a grim satisfaction at their discomfort now that they realized their mistake. But underlying it all was a growing sense of urgency. Every minute that passed was another minute that Andy was in danger. The officers, now eager to make amends, asked Keanu which direction the thugs had gone. Keanu pointed in the direction he had last seen them heading, his resolve firm. "They went that way," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Please, we need to find them fast. Andy's life may depend on it." With the police now involved and the urgency of the situation clear, Keanu felt a renewed hope. Together with the officers, He resumed the search for the thugs and Andy, determined to right the wrongs of the night and restore his shaken faith in humanity. But Keanu knew it was too late. The thugs had long since disappeared into the night. Looking at the officers, their earlier disdain still fresh in his mind, Keanu made a decision. He shook his head, declining their belated offer of help. "You know," he said, his voice calm but carrying a sharp edge, "when I first approached you, I was just another person in need. Your job is to protect and serve everyone, not just the people you deem worthy of your time." The officers shifted uncomfortably, shame evident on their faces. What if I had been seriously injured? What if every second counted? Keanu continued. You would never know how urgent a situation is just by looking at someone's appearance. The weight of his words hung in the air. The officers, thoroughly chastened, promised to alert their colleagues and keep an eye out for the thugs and the dog. Keanu provided them with descriptions of the men and Andy, but his disgust at their earlier behavior was evident. As he walked away, leaving the embarrassed officers behind, Keanu felt a mix of emotions. He was angry at the injustice he'd witnessed, worried sick about Andy, and increasingly aware of the challenges faced by those less fortunate in society. The night had opened his eyes to a side of the city he'd never truly seen before, and he knew he couldn't simply walk away from it. With a heavy heart but a strengthened resolve, Keanu continued his search, determined to find Andy and bring him to safety, no matter what it took. Exhaustion began to seep into Keanu's bones as he stood on the platform, watching trains come and go. The events of the night weighed heavily on him, each passing minute amplifying his concern for Andy's safety. He found himself at a crossroads, torn between continuing his seemingly futile search and boarding the next train home. The practical part of his mind argued that he should return home, get some rest, and visit the police station in the morning to file a formal report. He dreaded the conversation he'd have to have with the director and animal trainer, explaining Andy's disappearance. The potential consequences for the production schedule and the violation of animal welfare regulations loomed large in his thoughts. As another train pulled into the station, Keanu took a step towards it, his decision made. He would go home, regroup, and tackle this problem with fresh eyes in the morning. Despite his annoyance at the police officer's earlier unprofessional behavior, a small part of him hoped they might come through with some information about Andy or his stolen necklace. Just as the train doors opened and passengers began to file out, a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise of the station. "Keanu." "Keanu, wait." Turning, Keanu saw Max running towards him, his face flushed with exertion and urgency. The sight of the homeless man, whom he'd left not long ago in such a state of despair, filled Keanu with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Max, what's going on?" Keanu asked as Max reached him, bent over and gasping for breath. Between pants, Max managed to get out, "You must be searching for the thugs." "I know where they are." Keanu's heart leapt. "What? How did you know?" Max straightened up, his eyes shining with a determination that hadn't been there earlier. "Word travels fast in our community. A few of the others saw them harassing you. They told me about it, and I knew I had to find you. I told you, news travels fast down here among our community." The train doors closed behind them, the opportunity to leave passing by unnoticed. Keanu's full attention was on Max now, hope rekindling in his chest. "Do you know where Andy is?" Keanu asked urgently. Max shook his head. "Not exactly, but I know where those greedy jackals usually gather at this hour. If we hurry, we might be able to catch them before they do something to your dog." The certainty in Max's voice, born from bitter experience, left no room for doubt. Keanu nodded, his resolve strengthened. "Lead the way, Mac." Together, they set off at a brisk pace, retracing their steps back to the storage alcove area. As they walked, Max filled Keanu in on what he knew. "These guys, they're creatures of habit," Max explained. "They always end up in the same spot after their rounds. It's where they count their takings, plan their next moves." Keanu listened intently, impressed by the depth of knowledge the homeless community had about the workings of the station. It was a stark reminder of how invisible this world was to most people passing through. As they approached the alcove, both men slowed their pace, moving more cautiously. The urgency of their mission was palpable, but so was the potential danger. They both knew what these thugs were capable of. Rounding the corner, they saw them, the three men from earlier, huddled together in a dimly lit corner. Keanu's heart sank as he realized Andy was nowhere in sight. Max placed a restraining hand on Keanu's arm, sensing his impulse to rush forward. "Careful," he whispered. "We need to think this through." Keanu nodded, forcing himself to take a deep breath. The sight of the thugs, so casual and unaffected after the pain they'd caused, made his blood boil, but he knew Max was right. They needed a plan. As they stood there, hidden in the shadows, Keanu and Max exchanged a look of understanding. They were an unlikely pair, a Hollywood star and a homeless man, united by circumstance and a common goal. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The confrontation that lay ahead would not only determine Andy's fate, but also had the potential to change the dynamic of this underground world. As Keanu steeled himself for what was to come, he realized that this night had become about much more than just retrieving a stolen necklace and a borrowed dog. It had become a fight for justice, for the vulnerable, and for the soul of the city itself. With a shared nod of understanding, Keanu and Max stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light of the alcove. The thugs, engrossed in their conversation, didn't notice their approach at first. It wasn't until Keanu cleared his throat loudly that they looked up, surprise quickly morphing into sneers of recognition. "Well, well, Will," the tallest thug drawled. "Look who came back for more." Keanu stood tall, his voice carrying an authority that belied his earlier defeat. "I want my necklace back," he demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And both dogs, Andy, the beagle you took from me, and Button, the chihuahua you stole from Mac." The thugs exchanged glances before breaking into mocking laughter. Bowie, the bald one, stepped forward, Keanu's necklace now hanging prominently around his neck like a trophy. "You've got some nerve coming back here," Bowie sneered, fingering the necklace. "Didn't learn your lesson the first time?" Keanu's eyes locked onto his family heirloom, anger flaring in his chest at seeing it worn so disrespectfully. Despite recognizing the disadvantage of facing armed opponents, he strengthened his resolve. "That necklace belongs to my family," Keanu said, his voice low and dangerous. "And those dogs don't belong to you. Return them, and we can end this peacefully." Will stepped closer, his hand tightening around his baseball bat. "Oh, it's over, all right," he growled. "But not the way you think." The tension in the air was palpable, the situation teetering on the edge of violence. Keanu could see the thugs gripping their weapons more tightly, preparing for a fight. He glanced at Max, seeing the fear in the older man's eyes, but also a determination that matched his own. Just as it seemed the confrontation would erupt into physical violence, a stirring in the surrounding area caught everyone's attention. From the tents and makeshift shelters around them, people began to emerge, men and women of various ages, all bearing the marks of hard lives lived on the streets. They formed a protective circle around Keanu and Max. The thugs' confident sneers faltered as they found themselves suddenly outnumbered. An older man with a grey beard stepped forward, his voice gravelly but strong. Max's question cut through the commotion, bringing everyone's attention back to the pressing issue. "What about Button?" he repeated, his voice edged with worry. Keanu turned to Officer Turner, who was coordinating the response. "We need to check that pet store immediately," Keanu urged. Turner nodded, his expression serious. "We're on it," he assured. "I'll dispatch a unit to Pet Haven right now to investigate." The community around them, energized by the turn of events and their collective action, began discussing how they could assist further or provide more information. Keanu felt a surge of admiration for their spirit and resilience. The officers quickly organized a few of the community members to give statements, while others prepared to accompany the police to Pet Haven, hoping their presence would expedite the process. As the group organized, Keanu and Max stood together, watching the preparations. Keanu placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "We'll find them, Max," he said, his voice firm. "Andy and Button." Max nodded, his eyes showing a mix of hope and anxiety. "I know. And it's all because of you. If you hadn't come here tonight, who knows what would have happened?" The group was soon ready to move. Keanu, along with a few officers and members of the homeless community, set out towards Pet Haven. The ride over was tense, each minute stretching long as they neared the store. Upon arrival, the police immediately began speaking with the store management, explaining the situation and requesting cooperation. Officer Bobby led the way as they entered Pet Haven. The store was closed to customers at this late hour, but the manager agreed to let them inspect the animals. As they walked through the aisles of cages and pens, Keanu's heart raced, hoping against hope that they were not too late. Finally, in a quiet corner of the store, they found them. Andy and Button were in a small cage, looking disoriented but physically unharmed. Keanu's relief was palpable as he knelt down, calling softly to the beagle and chihuahua. At the sound of his voice, both dogs perked up, their tails wagging despite the unfamiliar surroundings. The manager, under the watchful eyes of the police, explained that he had just received the dogs and hadn't yet processed them into the system. "I didn't know they were stolen," he claimed, anxious under the scrutiny. Officer Turner took a statement from the manager and ensured that the dogs were safely handed over to Keanu and Max. As they left the store, Andy and Button in tow, Keanu couldn't help but feel a weight lift from his shoulders. The return to the subway station was triumphant. The community members who had stayed behind cheered as Keanu and Max approached with the dogs. Tears and smiles were exchanged as Button leapt into Max's arms, licking his face with unabated joy. "Thank you," Max said to Keanu, over and over. "You brought her back." Keanu looked around at the gathered crowd, their faces alight with a mix of relief and newfound strength. "It was all of us," he insisted. "This is what happens when a community stands together." The night had started with despair, but ended with a powerful sense of unity and purpose. As the police wrapped up, Keanu stayed a little longer, talking with George, the woman in the threadbare coat, and others, promising to help improve their situation in whatever way he could. This ordeal had not only recovered a stolen necklace and rescued two beloved dogs, but had also forged a bond between Keanu and a part of the city he'd only known from a distance. As he finally headed home, with Andy and Button safe, Keanu knew this experience would change him forever, deepening his commitment to those voices seldom heard and often ignored. The night's events had shown him the power of community and the strength found in standing together, no matter the odds. As the train whisked through the dark tunnels of New York City, Keanu sat quietly, the events of the night replaying in his mind like scenes from one of his films. Only this time, the drama had been real, the stakes personal. Andy, now safely snuggled by his side, seemed to sense his mood and nuzzled closer, a small beacon of warmth in the chill of the underground. The night had started as any other, but it had quickly spiraled into a narrative of courage, community, and confrontation. It wasn't just about recovering a stolen dog or a family heirloom anymore. It was about righting a wrong, about stepping up for those who had stood up for him, about being more than just a bystander in the face of injustice. Max's grateful, hopeful gaze stayed with Keanu even as the subway doors had closed between them. The promise of a new beginning wasn't just for Max or even the homeless community that had rallied around him. It was for Keanu too. The commitment he felt to these newfound friends and allies was a palpable force, pushing him to think about how he could use his resources and influence to effect real change. In the quiet of the train car, with the rhythmic clatter of tracks underscoring his thoughts, Keanu planned his next steps. He would start with ensuring Max and others like him had access to the resources they needed: job training, medical care, perhaps even housing assistance. His connections could help bridge the gap between need and help, between silence and support. The thought of what lay ahead was daunting, yet exhilarating. There was much to do, and the path wouldn't always be clear or easy, but the resolve that had driven him to confront the pet store, to stand with Max against the thugs, felt like a guiding light. As the train emerged from the tunnel, the bright lights of the next station washed over Keanu, casting long shadows on the platform. He looked down at Andy, whose calm presence seemed to affirm the choices of the night. "We've got a lot ahead of you, buddy," Keanu murmured, scratching the pup behind the ears. Stepping off the train, Keanu felt the weight of the night lift slightly with each step towards the exit. The cool air of the early morning brushed against his face as he walked out of the station, the city's pulse slowly waking around him. There was a sense of renewal in the air, a sense that anything was possible if one was willing to stand up and act. As he walked the quiet streets back to his apartment, the first hints of dawn streaking the sky, Keanu knew this was just the beginning. His actions tonight could ripple out, touching lives, changing futures. And as daunting as that might be, it was also a promise of involvement, of struggle, and, hopefully, of transformation. The city around him whispered of challenges and opportunities, of stories waiting to be told. And Keanu was ready to be a part of them, not just in fiction, but in the very real narratives of those around him. The night's journey had ended, but another, perhaps even more important, was just beginning.